Thank you so much for coming, and it really is a privilege actually to be here on what I think will be a very interesting, exciting, thought-provoking evening here at the University of Westminster. I have to be honest and say that I didn't realise that there were so many wonderful, lively, buzzing campuses that all seem to form part of this amazing thing called the University of Westminster. So it really is a pleasure to be here. My name is Julie Siddiqui, and I've been invited to try anyway to chair this wonderful panel that you see before you. I'm led to believe that this has been mainly initiated, and credit to them, by the ASWJ Society. Have I got that the right way around? Yes. So credit to them for organising something that I think is very, very important in the world that we live in the country that we're in. It's fantastic to see such a diverse group of people from different backgrounds, men and women, which is always brilliant. And for all of you to come, I'm sure you've come for all sorts of different reasons. Maybe you've been dragged here by your friend. Maybe you felt you had to come. Maybe you've been paid to come. I don't know what reasons you're here. But all in all, I think we'll all gain something. I always feel that I learn from all of these sorts of events. And it's just very, very important, as I say, in the world that we live in, that we open up our spaces to each other. I'm very much a fan of developing friendships from different backgrounds, so real good quality friendships is something that I always talk about. I think it's a very fundamental part of people coming together from different backgrounds. I'm sure as you're studying with each other, you're developing friendships, and long may that continue way beyond your university years. It becomes a lot harder actually when you're living a life outside of maybe school or university to keep those friendships going, but I would urge all of you to do that. And if we do that, I think the world can, and our country can become and will remain a brilliant place to be. But of course, we can't deny there are challenges. There are challenges all over the world. There are people doing all sorts of horrific, horrible things, supposedly in the name of our religions. And that's upsetting and difficult for all of us. I have 4 children, and I'm constantly faced, particularly my 12-year-old Musa, who is obviously doing RS at school and comes home with all sorts of questions, most of which I can't answer. Sometimes he challenges us, sometimes he gets upset, sometimes he feels that the world of this world is on his shoulders, and other times he couldn't care because he's a gymnast and he'd rather just spend his time doing that. So there's all of that, and I think with him it constantly reminds me how difficult it is for young people, for people like all of you, sometimes to figure out what this world is about. But I think hopefully an evening like this will help us all to do that. Now, before I introduce this amazing, wonderful, brilliant panel that you see in front of you, I'm actually going to introduce another amazing, brilliant, wonderful person who is a student from this very university, who I actually kind of discovered recently on the internet. Her name is Khadija. She's sitting right here. And the reason I made the connection between this place and her is because in a video that she's made, which maybe she'll talk about in a minute, she was very proudly wearing her University of Westminster hoodie. And when I asked her about it, she said that she was wearing it specifically in that video for a reason, because she's very proud to be a student here for her own reasons as well. So I'm actually going to start off now in a maybe more of an unconventional way. I'm not going to sing, don't worry, or dance, anything like that. I'm going to get Khadija to start us off with a brilliant, inspirational spoken word piece that she's written, that I saw her perform only on the internet, and reached out to her, and she very bravely agreed to come and perform it in front of all of you. And I'll leave it to Khadija to maybe explain a bit about it and then perform for all of you before we go on to the panel. So let's give Khadija a very warm welcome.
Hi everyone. So my name is Khadija, as Julie was saying. Thank you, Julie, for inviting me. Yeah, so my name is Khadija Abdul Hamid. I'm actually studying my final year doing business management with entrepreneurship. I'm going to go straight into the video, but I want to explain a bit about the video. Julie did mention that I was wearing my university hoodie. The reason I was wearing my university hoodie is because I tried 4 years to get into university and I failed, and on my 5th try I obviously achieved it. So in the video I'm wearing it, and when I perform you'll understand what I mean. I think the video is really about trying to really inspire people to achieve their dreams and go at it, because I've been knocked down a lot of times, and what I do now with the platform that, alhamdulillah, praise to God, that He's blessed me with, is that I talk a lot outside of universities. I've got talks here, around everywhere basically. And another thing is that I went through 7 years of depression, and one of the things when I was going through it was a lot of people, especially my teachers growing up in high school, telling me that you're not going to amount to anything in life, you're not going to make it. One of my teachers always reminded me that Khadija, you will never get into university, keep dreaming. So, can't wait to meet her. So my poetry, my spoken word is actually one of my first spoken word out there in the world. And it's going to be 3 weeks, it's actually 3 weeks, it's going to be 4 weeks in a month on Sunday, on the 13th. And it's already reached 28 countries. In the USA, it's hit around 8 states. And just from the video, I haven't just performed it here, I performed it other places as well. And alhamdulillah, I've got so many Islamic charities and stuff telling me we need to come in and perform this poetry, etc. So I'm going to go into the poem. The poem is called Dead at 25. And I don't know anyone here if you've heard of a quote called "Some people die at 25 and aren't buried until 75." Has anyone here heard of the quote?
Yep.
You? Okay, brilliant. One person. So basically what it means is that a lot of people keep their dreams with them at a young age. So you might have a dream that you want to achieve, but in reality, you actually die with your dreams when you're 75 or whatever your age is. So that's what it's trying to highlight. So I took that quote and I turned it into a poem of my perception of what it means, basically. Okay, my mouth's dry. Okay. I want to have a conversation with you, not as a mass of people, but as an individual. What were you doing right before clicking play on this video? How did you even find it? Was it because the title attracted your attention or because your friend sent it to you? The reason I'm asking is because I'm curious. I'm curious about what you're doing to fulfill your dreams. Now I understand I'm asking a deep question, but how else will I get you thinking? Let's go back and start from the beginning. Have you ever questioned your existence? And I'm not talking about religion. Or what's your purpose? Why are you living? Have you ever thought of making a difference, or do you prefer to watch others from a distance? Those who are changing the world and moving things forward. You see, I have a problem because I don't write poetry just to make it rhyme. I write poetry to cultivate your subconscious mind. Now I want you to pay attention to everything I'm about to say. I want you to write down your fears in a blank piece of paper and what you're proud of on the other. Now compare and contrast and tell me what you see. If your fears outweigh more than your achievements, then ask yourself, why could this be? Is it because your teacher told you to be realistic about your dreams, or because a loved one doesn't believe? Or could it be that society told you it's impossible to achieve? I find it strange that we let others shape our philosophy, yet at the same time, we are inspired by those who've conquered every criticism they've received. In the words of Michael Jordan, you must expect great things of yourself before you can do them. Sorry, I got a bit scared. You can do them. The same man who was told he was incompetent in his field and kicked out his high school team. He said, I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Or what about Steve Jobs, who started his company from his garage and taught us the value of $1 and a dream? He revolutionized technology, and today, Apple is a $2 billion company. Or when he taught us that failure is sometimes a blessing in disguise, because when he was fired from Apple, it led him to discover Pixar Studios. In the words of Steve Jobs, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you'd have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. Or that all your dreams can come true if you have the courage to pursue them. A famous quote by Walt Disney. A man who was fired from his job because he lacked imagination. Look at the irony. And today, he is responsible for the generation of childhood memories. Or about Albert Einstein, who was dubbed rebellious and a failure, only because those around him couldn't understand that he was gifted. He couldn't speak properly and couldn't read until the age of 4, but he went on to win a Nobel Prize. Everyone's going to judge you, but I want you to remember that in the words of Einstein, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, and will live his whole life believing that he's stupid. Coming out of failure, strong and determined, was the key that succeeded J.K. Rowling, who had her Harry Potter books rejected 12 times. Most of you have given up on your third try. She said that it's impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not live at all. And it was her that taught me that it's our abilities that show who we truly are far more. Sorry, I mixed it up, but yeah, far more than our abilities. I believe that some people get so close to achieving their dreams, like 5 + 5 + 5 = 550. It's because it's the small steps that create the big difference. I want to leave you with one thing, something which I've come to realise. In a world with smartphones instead of phone booths, GPS instead of maps, flat TVs instead of vintage, cars instead of horse carriages, digital cameras instead of colour types, impossible isn't something that can't be done. It's just something that hasn't been done before. Some people die at 25 but aren't buried in 75. The richest place in the world is the graveyard, because a lot of people die of unspoken dreams. I wonder what you're going to do after hearing my spoken word poetry. Will you decide to turn your aspirations into reality, or would you let your grave be their destiny? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for that, and that was not easy. You know, it's a very brave thing to do, to stand in front of a group like this and do something like that. I never would have been able to do that. Certainly couldn't do it now, and definitely wouldn't have been able to do it at that age. And I think, you know, Khadija putting her honest, sincere self into what she's doing is what will make her successful, and I pray that she carries on and to do great things, and someone that's an amazing alumni from this university in years to come. So without any further ado, I will now start with this wonderful panel. The idea is that they all speak for about 5 to 7, not 57. Don't make my life too difficult by having to stop you too much. So 5 to 7 minutes each, because then that gives us enough to hear from you, but to also give everybody else a chance to speak and to give our wonderful audience a chance to grill you all, ask you questions about what they've heard or something else that's on their mind. We heard Khadija talk about J.K. Rowling, and of course from a chair's perspective, when you're given the list of speakers and you read something like this about Simon here on my right, who I'm going to start with, and it says here that he was invited by the Christian Union after studying archaeology and Harry Potter studies, and as a chair you kind of look at it and think, did I just read that right or what? So yes, Simon here studied Harry Potter studies at university, then moved to Oxford, worked for Iwern Holidays for a couple of years, telling teenagers about Jesus. I mean, that's a brilliant introduction, so I will leave it at that and hand over to Simon for his 5 or 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for having me. Particularly thanks to Jim for inviting me. And I must admit, when I was first invited, got the email through about representing the Christian faith this evening, what is the place of Christianity in the modern world. And I initially, when I saw my co-panellists, I was filled with insecurity. So I looked at the list and I scanned down and I saw, wow, we've got a couple of doctors here, people who have appeared before Crown Courts, written books, been on TV. And then why did I put about Harry Potter studies on there? They're going to think I'm terrible before I've even begun. What have I done? But then it struck me, actually, me standing here and looking weak is actually the very centre of the message I'm going to say today about the place of Christianity in the modern world. It's one of weakness, perceived weakness. So we're going to look at today at a couple of sentences from a letter that's written to an early church in Corinth, in Greece. And Corinth in the day, basically, they had the academic rigour of Oxford, it had the kind of hedonistic lifestyle of Vegas, and a kind of the cool factor of Hollywood, if you know what I mean, all mashed into one, as you can imagine, kind of parts of London in all those. And basically, the early church then, the first century, was kind of wondering, in this really impressive city, how do we fit in as Christians? How do we fit into this world? And actually, the answer, we'll see tonight, is it fits in a place of weakness. So I'm just going to say two things today. Christianity has a weak-sounding message, and it has a weak-looking people. Okay, and we'll think about how that fits into the modern world. So firstly, it's got a weak-sounding message. And there's a verse here from this letter from the Bible in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 1:18. says that the message of the cross is foolishness to those who aren't Christians. But to those who are Christians, it is the power of God. So basically, the cross is as central to Christianity as football is to a game of football. So take a football out of a football game and you just got 80,000 people watching, 20 men in short shorts and long socks. So the cross is central in Christianity. It's the main bit of it. That's what this verse says. And the message of the cross is really just that humans are sinful and that God needs to punish them. But he came down himself as a human, Jesus Christ, God the Son, and he died on that cross. He didn't deserve it, but he did. And he took the punishment for sin. For sinners like you and me. That's the message of the cross. That's really the message at the heart of Christianity. And this message, it just sounds ridiculous to people. Actually, that's what the Bible says here. It says it sounds like foolishness. It's kind of unpalatable. How can you believe in something, 2,000 years ago, that God himself would come and die naked, bleeding, crucified, tortured to death? It's ridiculous. That's what lots of my friends who aren't Christians, most of them kind of agnostic atheists, that's what they'll say to me. Mate, it's just a bit weird what you believe. It's foolish. But actually, to those who are Christians, this message is the power of God. It is the saving power from sin. And actually, in God's control, this weak-looking message is true. Actually, an Israeli criminal being killed 2,000 years ago, that is God's solution to the problems of the world. That's the Christian belief. And actually, we have the proof. 3 days later, Jesus rose again. So actually, I personally expect in a kind of growingly secular London, you read the papers, it'll tell us church declining, countries going more and more secular. Actually, this message of Christianity is going to grow more and more laughed at, more and more weird, look more and more foolish. And yet, like it or not, it is the power of God. That's the first thing about Christianity. It's a weak-sounding message. And then secondly, it's a weak-looking people. So another verse says, talking of this church, not many of you were wise by human standards, not many were influential, not many of noble birth. But God chose the lowly things of this world to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. In other words, in Corinth, in this church, none of the cool kids became Christians, okay? It was a bunch of losers in this church. That's what the Bible says. So no celebrities, no decent orators, no clever scholars. They were kind of a load of nobodies. And actually I expect that in the UK to be more and more the case, growingly. So we're unusual in this country. In the last few centuries, Christianity, kind of Christendom, has been a strong presence. So our Queen at the moment kind of quite openly professes herself as a Christian. In politics, it's kind of helpful for politicians to associate Christianity quite often in this country. The USA, the president himself, kind of needs to go to church, doesn't he? Well, actually, reading the New Testament would tell us that's really unusual. Actually, what the North Korean church are going through at the moment, do you know in North Korea there are 70,000 Christians in prison camps dying because they're Christians? Actually, that kind of persecution, that's more normal. A weak-looking people is more normal. Now, why? Why does God want this kind of weakness? Well, actually, it says no one can boast in themselves as humans. The church can't say, hey, look at us, look how strong we are here in London. No, we're a load of weak-looking people. We're not that clever. But actually, we see God's power in that he can save even really weak people, sinful people, like us Christians, who don't deserve it. So just to conclude, what is the place of Christianity in the modern world? So the stats will tell us church in decline, secularism is on the march, the default in UK is growingly kind of agnostic-ish, I guess. Often people growing up in England are saying that. So Christianity hasn't looked so weak for centuries. It looks like it's shrinking. But the church will always look weak. Its message will be mocked, it will be ridiculed. I expect that as a Christian, as a Bible-believing Christian, I expect that. Its people are going to be scorned and thought pathetic. But actually in that weakness, we see the power of God. It's not powerful Christians. It's a very powerful God. Jesus Christ is a very powerful Saviour. And he came to the world to save really weak, sinful people like me and you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was a brilliant brilliant thing to start us off with, and all sorts of stuff, I'm sure, flying around in people's minds, including the Christians here, as well as other people from different backgrounds, so thank you very much for that. I'll now hand over to Rabbi Leah, who grew up in the United States and moved to London a few years ago, where she completed studies at the Leo Baeck College. She's now a student and young adult chaplain working with students and young adults based in Norwich.
I live here, but live here, work with students and young adults here, and have a community that I'm a rabbi in Norwich.
Okay.
Right? Silly differentiation.
So there you go. So I'll hand over to you, and please 5-7 minutes of your words of wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you also for having me. I'm really glad to be here and to get to. I'm excited to hear everyone else on the panel and to hear questions. I guess I'll just say just a few words about myself so that when you have questions, you can know kind of how to, what would be interesting to contextualize when it comes to why I'm up here. So as Julie said, I'm a rabbi in the Jewish community, and I'm based in London, and I work with students and young adults in London. So basically people post-school and before kind of settling down to whatever that next phase is, what David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, calls the Odyssey years, which for all of us in this kind of millennial age group are getting longer. So there seemed to be that desire that people who had left their families but had yet to kind of settle in a synagogue or Jewish community to have a rabbi for them as well. So I have people into my homes. My husband is also a rabbi, so we have fortnightly studies and dinners, and I go around to the different universities and help out with the JSOCs, which is how I got invited to this. And I also have a small pulpit. There's a synagogue in Norfolk that needs a part-time rabbi. There are only about 50 to 60 people, so I go out there a few times a month. And I think I was saying to Simon right before this panel that the Jewish community gets invited a lot, very kindly, onto interfaith panels, simply because we're the smallest in numbers of the world traditions, so we get more invites, I think, in the sense that there's only about 300,000 Jews in the Jewish community in the UK, and I think if you take Islam as a whole or Christianity as a whole, the numbers are higher for both of those. Of course, we all have our denominations and divisions among, which I think we're going to come out with hearing more about as well. But we end up getting invited to be on panels because there are not many of us, so we get the clergy end up getting more invites than most. I just say this to say that I don't speak certainly for all the Jewish community, as none of us speak up here for the whole of who we are. I'm from the progressive Jewish world. The Jewish world there's a spectrum in it, and there's a split, as I think in all the world traditions represented here, between the interpretation of our sacred texts. So the Torah and the Talmud, which are the two kind of most sacred texts of the Jewish tradition, the denominations split along their interpretations of them, and also on their interaction with modernity. And so that leads me kind of, I suppose, as a segue to what is the role of religion in contemporary society? Well, I guess the first thing that I would say is that about 100 years ago in the West, in Europe and in the States and elsewhere in the West, I think there was kind of a moment where people said in the post-Enlightenment world, secularism is the new religion and religion is dead. I think we all learn about that at university. Well, I think we all come to say that we're here to stay. That was a moment in time. And for the secular humanists who I have friends of that stripe, atheists, agnostics, secular humanists among us, I think there's something scary. And I speak first to those people. When I think something's scary to them when we all say, actually, religion is very important to us, and it's an important part of our lives, and we're here to stay. And I think it speaks to some of what, Julie, you were talking about with your children, having to answer all these questions at religious, at RS, about why there are people out there in the world, in all of the names of all of our world traditions, doing really terrible things, presumably in the name of us. I think that is very scary to people who don't understand, I think, what true religious people stand for. And I guess that would be to go on to say that I believe that an open religious outlook will prevail, and I believe that we are all religious thinkers in some ways, even the secular humanists among us. I think secular humanism is a sort of understanding of our place in the world and an attempt to understand our place, and that we all ascribe to understandings about how we see our meaning in the world, and I think that those who call themselves actively religious are people who are, I think, maybe more comfortable with a certain set of language about what that looks like. And I think that a very important part of being a religious thinker is something that one of my teachers once said to me a couple years ago, which is that we must know our story, whether that's a religious world tradition story or a family story or a subcultural story or a national story, but we must also see the transparency of our story, meaning we carry it very deeply and in our hearts, and we all carry these stories around with us, but that we must be able to see that for other people, we need to be able to see people that are not in that story through our story. I almost imagined it as, when he was describing it, as if it was a piece of paper that was very important and very solid for me, but that I could see others through. The transparency of our narratives is very important, I think, in the modern world, and I think that's something that we are all going to have to embrace more and more, that for the secular humanists, they're going to have to embrace the fact that religion is a deeply important story for us religious thinkers. For those who are more fundamentalists and extremists in their stories, they're going to have to embrace, as we all are, that our story is but one of many stories going on in the world, and that there needs to be a transparency in that story. And I think that is the tension I see going on in religion and contemporary society today, the tension between those two sides. And I think we're all trying to figure that out. On one hand, the sense of our own meaning in our story, and on the other side, an understanding of how we interact with others. And I think at the end of the day, I very much believe that all of us, religious thinkers, secular humanists, agnostics, those who prescribe to one or all of the above, really are in a goal together to make the world a better place. I really believe that, and I think we have to figure out how to do that better. And the only way we can do that better is to see one another as B'Tselem Elohim, created in God's image, which is, I think, the most important message, I think, probably of all the world traditions, but it's the way it's said in the Jewish tradition. B'Tselem Elohim, that we are created in God's image. And if we are all created in God's image, then we are all expressions of the multiplicity of whatever that oneness or that unifying nature is in the world. And to that end, there's a wonderful bit in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Jeremiah, one of the great prophets of the ancient Near East, where he says to the people, having received God's words, having received God's words, he says, "See, a time is coming when God will make a new covenant with all the people of the world, and in those days they shall no longer say, 'Parents have eaten sour grapes, and children's teeth are therefore blunted. But everyone shall die for their own sins. Whoever eats sour grapes, only his teeth shall be blunted.'" And it's a bit of a parable, actually, for saying, what Jeremiah is saying there is, one day we will perfect the world with God's help, such that we don't visit the things that we do in the world upon the children that come after us, but everyone each will inherit, because of their ethical and right thinking, the perfect world. And the only way that that can come to be is if we all come together and understand that that is what everyone is working toward, and that Jeremiah acknowledges that that isn't the world that we live in. It's a really actually wonderful, very painful moment where God, through Jeremiah, acknowledges, this is not the world that I have created, God is saying. I haven't created a world where if parents eat sour grapes, their children's teeth won't be blunted, but one day we will be partners together in making that be the case. And I think as a message in contemporary society, it is a wonderful message, and one that I actually do have faith that all people are in some ways trying to put forward. And I think that's just the Jewish traditions, perhaps, way in Jeremiah and in B'Tselem Elohim, the idea that we are created in God's image, that we as the Jewish people say that.
Thank you very much, and well done for sticking to your 7 minutes. No pressure. So now I'd like to introduce Sheikh Zain Al-Akhtab Siddiqui, great name, Siddiqui, which we share. And he's been invited here by the ASWJ. As I mentioned earlier, they are the sort of brains, if you like, behind initiating this event, and credit to them for doing that. So we're going to hear now from him. He has read law at undergraduate level, then completed legal practice course with masters. He's an expert and very well respected in both British and Islamic law, and it has provided evidence at all levels in all sorts of amazing places: County Court, Crown Court, High Court, and the Court of Appeal, providing expert evidence on intricate areas of Islamic law. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our next speaker.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم صدق الله مولانا العظيم. The verse of the Quran which I have recited, I will briefly translate and go on to what I wish to present to you in the short time window that I have been given. God in the Quran says, O people, irrespective of who you are, where you're from, O people, I created you from one man and one woman. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, and I distributed you amongst different races and nations and tribes. لِتَعَارَفُوا, for one reason and one reason only, so that you may recognize each other. But إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ, the most noble of you are those who are God conscious. In the world in which we live today, a new God has now been born, and this God is an unprecedented God. And the name of this God is called the human mind. In certain strands and circles, you will find the presence of this God in a very arrogant form. The human mind has evolved and developed, allowed itself to see the potential that it has within it. And in that process, it assumes that it is invincible. It assumes that it has the ability to encapsulate the magnitude of this universe. But of course, as the human mind develops, it realizes that in itself, through its own faculties, it cannot encapsulate the universe, and hence the need for technology. And as technology advances, this human mind tries to intellectualize what it sees, and then formulates thinking based upon such perceptions. And on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with that. Yesterday, something was socially acceptable in England. Today, it no longer remains acceptable because the human mind has evolved. It has developed. And whilst there's nothing wrong with the evolution of the human mind and development, it has produced many commendable results. But this arrogance that it has also brought with it, that now we don't need religion, has resulted in this mind now becoming our master rather than our slave. And it's very important to know that whatever it is, this human mind, it is a product, and someone somewhere has manufactured it. It would be diabolical and stupid for someone to say that this bottle just emerged, evolved out of nature. Someone somewhere put it through a certain process, and you would be offending that person, even though you don't know who actually made this bottle. What actually you do, you can find out. But the reality is, it would be stupid to say that, well, this just evolved. Someone somewhere who has the know-how, developed this bottle, and within it gave water. Likewise, our mind may not be able to intellectualize or encapsulate the manufacturer of this universe, but there is a manufacturer. That manufacturer created us, as far as the Quran is concerned, because he wanted man to realize who he was, what his reality was, so that through an understanding of his reality, he could understand the reality of his manufacturer. Being created in God's image is a theme that is quite prevalent in all the Abrahamic faiths, and that's why when the manufacturer looks at all the different products in this universe and compares and evaluates each and every one, he says, certainly in the Quran, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. The human being is the best of creation. So the question that begs to be asked is, what is it within this human that makes him the best? Clearly, if you compare the human to the animal kingdom or to the metaphysical kingdom that science hasn't yet discovered or is trying to discover, there are many facets that overbear the reality of that creation over the human being. So what is it? Unfortunately for us, as humans, we have reduced our existence to this piece of meat, which consists of an age limit, which has a start date and a sell-by date. We have no control over when it starts, we have no control over when it ends. We don't know when it's going to end, how it's going to end. We don't know who we are, where we come from, what we're doing here. None of us chose and designed our faces. None of us chose where we're going to be born, what we're going to do, what our vocation is. A lot of these decisions were made by someone, somewhere. Who? Why? Why did he put all this in front of me? Why am I having all the problems that I'm having? Is religion really the answer? So the human mind that is now in certain strands of human thinking believes it has all the answers. But unfortunately, you see that this new God that has emerged isn't stable. One day it says one thing, and another day it says another. And the justification for such shift is, well, we're developing. It's a change. But we need to stand back and think, is there an alternative to this new regime where everything is dictated by the intellectual human mind? Well, religion certainly comes into the arena and says, listen, the human mind is just a facet of your creation. There is more aspects of your creation that you haven't yet discovered, which you, in your scientific pursuits, simply cannot understand. For example, the starting point and finishing point of science in its empirical reality is the five senses. I know this is hard because I can touch it. I know it's pleasant because I can smell it. I know because I can see the five senses. And then there's the intellect. 1 + 1 = 2, not because I saw it, but because I was able to intellectualize it. So that's the beginning and the end of science. But if you look at the scriptures, Abrahamic scriptures generally, but from my perspective, the Quran in particular, these are only two sources of knowledge. There are more sources of knowledge that remain unexplored. Let me give you an example. Where you have external five senses, you have internal five senses. Today I see people who I've never seen, and I close my eyes, I can concoct your image in my mind. But if I've never seen you, how am I going to be able to concoct your image in my mind? Science doesn't have any answers to that. Religion does. The Quran does. The Sunnah does. Today you have a dead body in front of you. You bring the best doctors in the world and say, here you are, resurrect it. Bring life back into it. They can't. They say, well, there's no soul in it. Well, what does science have to do with souls? What does science know about souls? Nothing. But when Jesus says to a dead body, Qum bi-iznillah, stand, that dead body stands. What's going on? There's a science beyond the science that we understand. Likewise, we have an intellect which is the product of this mind, but there is another intellect that we have, which is the product of this heart. Of course, the only facet of that we understand is love. And the only prototype of love we have before us is that given to us by Hollywood, Bollywood or Lollywood, whichever would you subscribe to. The point is that this intellectual mind has a lot more to offer. The concept of this is just a processor, a calculator. When you're sitting and suddenly an idea comes to you, where did that idea come from? Who gave you that idea? Last night you saw in your dream that something was going to happen. Something happened. How is that possible? Science has no answers. And I'm not referring to some religious theologian or some prophet or some saint. I'm talking about people like Edgar Cayce. How does science explain Edgar Cayce? And I'm not talking about Mother Shipley. I'm talking about a person who's been forensically analysed by the CIA. And the CIA have created an institute of Edgar Cayce only because They're fascinated by the fact that this illiterate person goes to sleep at night, wakes up in the morning and gives elaborate scientific answers to which even scientists are baffled about. Science doesn't have any answers to that. The point I'm trying to make is that the ambit of science is limited to the human mind, but what religion offers is a more broader spectrum. And therefore, whilst you have an internal intellect housed in the mind, the Quran also talks about an internal intellect housed in the heart. And then finally, the final source of knowledge is revelation. Revelation is a facet of our existence that we simply don't understand. We all, to a lesser or greater degree, are recipients of revelation. Of course, at the higher end of the spectrum, you have prophets who have accurate, legal, certain revelation. And at the lower end of the spectrum, you have people who are subject to revelation from satanic sources, as the Quran says, and even other religions talk about, which are inspired by Satan, but it's nevertheless revelation. How do we distinguish? We simply haven't given religion the time. We treat religion as a set of rituals, practice it as a cult, and simply don't give it the thought of day. But if we realized what religion actually had to offer a modern society, we would realize that what modern secular society is failing to deliver to the modern man, their religion comes to the rescue. Let me give you one or two examples, and just the problem with lawyers is they don't know when to end.
No, I can see that.
So let me just give you one example in this respect. The modern state thinks that man, and it's based on the thinking that man in a state of nature is a beast, and when he comes to civil society, Thomas Hobbes, when he comes to civil society, needs to forego certain civil liberties, in return for which the state will guarantee certain liberties, civil liberties, grant him freedom, and grant him prosperity, health, wealth, blah, blah, blah. So the modern secular society gives man the freedom to do and certain basic safeguards, and it feels that given those safeguards, man can prosper. But if you look at the fabric of the modern man and how content and happy he is today, and if you look at the man 100 years ago, there's a huge difference. The modern man is far more regulated than the man 100 years ago. The modern man needs to turn to argument and to the court far more frequently than the man 100 years ago. Why is it that the corpus of law is ever so becoming more and more, and man is becoming more and more regulated, yet hundreds of years ago there wasn't as much law? The answer simply is that religion says, listen, whether that traffic light, whether that camera on the traffic light is working or not, doesn't matter. Don't apply your intellect. That if that camera is working, I will abide by the law. But if the camera isn't working, I'll look left and right and I'll just go. Who knows? Who cares? No one knows. No harm done. But religion says, listen, it doesn't matter if the camera is not working. There is someone looking at you, and he will hold you to account for what you do. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, a day will come. So construct your life not out of fear of the state, not out of fear of being caught out, not out of fear of what your peer pressure or your social pressure will deliver to you. Construct your life on principles that your manufacturer who created you has given you certain goals, certain ideals to look up to subscribe to work towards and idealize, and he will hold you to account one day for them. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ.
Thank you very much for that. Now we're moving swiftly on to the next contributor, who is Dr. Damien Howard, who's been invited here by the Catholic Society. So Dr. Damien is a Jesuit priest, a lecturer in theology at Haythorpe College, which is part of the University of London. He's an author of a book called Being Human in Islam. He lectures and broadcasts and discusses widely issues around Christian-Muslim relations and the impact of that on the modern world on religion. And he lives in a Jesuit community in East London. So without any further ado, Dr. Damien Howard.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and thanks very much for this wonderful invitation to be part of a very distinguished panel indeed. I've been asked to speak about the role of religion in contemporary society, so I think we need to start by looking quickly at contemporary society itself. And there are two things that really strike me about it very forcefully. First of all, contemporary society demands a huge amount of solidarity between its citizens, unprecedented in human history. And I know religious people like us usually start by saying nasty things about contemporary society, but I want to start by recognising something extraordinary about the way we live. We pay huge amounts of our income in taxes to look after the health, education and defence of people we don't even know. And maybe if we did, we wouldn't even like them. Simply never happened before in human society. I'm not just talking about a couple of percent of a kind of religious tax. I'm talking about 25, 30, 40% of your income. It's an extraordinary gesture of solidarity. And do people complain about it? On the whole, no. They just pay their tax and just think that this is part of what you do in modern society. It's an extraordinary thing that we just take for granted, and yet there it is. A second thing that strikes me about contemporary society is that everybody feels in a vulnerable little minority. And I say that sometimes to people, and they say, well, I know I'm part of a small, vulnerable minority, but I don't think the rest of them are. Look, they're all part of a big, powerful majority who make me feel small. And actually my experience is nobody in our society feels that they're part of a big, strong majority. Think about it. We all know that the Muslims at the moment feel, for very good reason, that they're being got at. They're being misrepresented by the media and blamed for all sorts of things of which they are entirely innocent. Think about what it might be like to be a secular humanist. I don't know how many of you there might be in the audience tonight, possibly not that many, because maybe coming into a room full of religious people might just be a little bit intimidating. Certainly, although we religious people often think of them as very powerful, they've got the whole of secular culture behind them, and sure enough they have, still, there are quite a small percentage of the British population who would say, I don't believe in God, I don't have any religion, and I think religion is a bad thing. Probably about 15% or something like that. Quite small. And when religious people get on their high horse and make demands, they get a bit scared that their identity and their rights are up for grabs. I could wax lyrical about how Catholics have felt persecuted, a minority in this country, but I shan't. I'll just say that we're the only ones here who can't marry Prince Charles. That's how bad it is. But Christians certainly feel quite weak in contemporary society. For all sorts of reasons, they feel under attack. The Jews are a very small group indeed, and they feel persecuted. All of us feel like that. Now, you don't need a PhD in sociology to realise that a society which absolutely depends on very, very high levels of solidarity between people who are very different from each other, and yet also contains people who all feel vulnerable and under attack, that's quite a fragile society. That's a society that could easily fracture. And we're seeing it in various ways happening today. Social cohesion has become something we're very worried about, because we all know that those bonds between us are not so strong. It's all right as long as the electricity is running, we've all got running water, but start to take those away, and who knows what groups we might fall into and how we might relate to each other. It could be quite scary. So what's the role of religion in a society like that? I think it's very simple. It's not the only role that religion fulfills, but in a society like that, the first thing that religion needs to do is to make people feel deeply secure, deeply safe, that it's okay to be who they are. And I don't think there's very much else that can do that, actually. I'm afraid safe spaces for students in university campuses can't do that. I'm afraid that equality legislation can't do that. It can do a bit, but it can't reach right to the bottom. The only thing that can make you and me feel truly safe is the one who created us, because he's capable of holding us in our littleness, in our brokenness, and yes, in our sinfulness, and just letting us know that we're loved and accepted as who we are. And I think we all know that. I think that's what our religions at their best do for us. They let us know that we are accepted and loved just as we are. And that's quite a big deal. Now, religion doesn't always do that. It can also be part of the problem. It can also divide us and fracture us and make us suspicious of each other. But it is best when it goes right. Religion gives us a security and a sense of safety that nothing else does, because it reaches right down to the very depths of our being. That's what God alone can do. There's a great Christian spiritual writer called Meister Eckhart in the medieval period, who said that God alone is one. That's something we can all agree on here. God alone is one. And by one he meant, among other things, God alone is the one who is content to be God's self. You see, we human beings, we're a bit restless. We always want more. We want to be someone different. We want to be stronger. We want more money, whatever it is. But God alone is one. God is contained within God's self. God is happy to be God. And the one thing that God can give us through his grace is oneness. Not the oneness of God itself, but the oneness that makes us content to be who we are. And that seems to me something that religion can and needs to do in contemporary society.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone's thinking of questions. Just as a reminder, they will be questions, not sermons or lectures, but questions. So it's always very tempting to think that you suddenly have your own platform and you can give your own views and sermons, but this isn't the time for that. It will be a time for questions directed at either an individual or to the whole panel, but please try and start thinking about what they might be after we've heard from our last speaker. So our last but not least speaker has been invited here by the Ahlul Bayt Society, and he is Sheikh Dr. Muhammad Zakaria. He's a graduate in Islamic Studies and Arabic, a qualified teacher and lecturer at the Islamic College for 16 years. He is a lecturer in research, methodology, education, and teacher training. He has a specialism in race and education, and he has taught, amongst other things, at Birkbeck College, part of the University of London. Without any further ado, I'll hand over to our last speaker.
Thank you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وبسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد والشكر لله رب العالمين الذي فطر السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على عرش العظيم والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. إخوة وأخوات في الله, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you. Thank you very much to the Ahlul Bayt Society of Westminster University for extending this invitation to me to speak on a very important topic. When I was asked to speak on this topic, the role of religion in contemporary society, a number of things started to go off in my mind. Which religion? Which society? What is the definition of religion? If we take a sociological approach, we can see, let's say from the, 1600s until now, the definition of religion has changed. Within religion, we include that which is secular, that which is non-sacred. And in my approach to this term religion, I would include secular traditions as religions. Sometimes we speak of the civic nature of religion, or civic religions, as it were. What is the role of religion in contemporary society? Well, it depends who you talk to. If you speak to Nick Griffin, if you speak to the individuals who champion the cause of Britain First, well, one particular religion has no place in contemporary society. And if we take the British context, then it is Islam has no place at all within contemporary British society, and we know the narrative which they spout continuously. The approach I take is an approach which was crystallized by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the city of Medina, where he and his followers had to flee to. And they were invited by the majority of Medinan society to take up residence there. The news of this new faith spread far and wide throughout the immediate region. And people would come from different religious backgrounds to ask the Prophet, well, what is this he's calling to? What is this Islam that people are making such a fuss about? One of the groups who came to Medina were from a place called Najran, and they were a Christian group. And they entered into a dialogue with the Prophet and his followers, primarily around the nature of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. As you know, in Islam, we do not see Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, as the Son of God. We see him as a prophet of God. But here's a very important point. When we engage in interfaith dialogue, we should be comfortable with the differences. And it shouldn't matter that we disagree, but it's how we disagree that counts. So they entered into a discussion with him. And it came time for the prayers of the Christians. Where are they going to pray? Are they going to pray out on the road? Are they going to pray in a house? Are they going to pray in some nondescript building? So what the Prophet did is he turned to his successor, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam, and he said to him, go to the mosque and make a space in the mosque for these Christians to pray. Different belief. A belief in the nature of Isa or Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, totally at odds with that within Islam. But nevertheless, what the Prophet did is he used his religion, his Islam, to make a bridge of brotherhood, understanding, peace, love, and respect with this Christian group who came to Medina to inquire about this new faith, Islam. Let me give you quickly some personal narrative. I've only got a few minutes left. When I began to study religion, I began to study religion from a particular perspective, and that is to train as a theologian. And through the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year, seventh year, eighth year, I graduated. And I graduated with all this stuff on religion, and primarily on Islam. And the day I graduated, I cried. Tears came to my eyes, and I cried. And it wasn't due to the happiness of graduation, although, as many of you will soon discover, graduating is a great thing, and many of us have discovered this also. I cried at the poverty of not only knowledge which I had acquired, but also understanding of other religions. Within Islam, to be a Muslim who patterns their life after the life-affirming message of the Quran, to know about other religions, to respect them, is part and parcel of our faith. And the last thing I'll leave you with is a statement of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, where he says, "Khayrun nasi anfa'uhum linnas." The best of humanity, not the best of Muslims. Khayrun nasi, the best of humanity, أنفعهم للناس, are those who benefit humanity the most. So in the Prophet's eyes, you tell me, what is the role of religion? It doesn't matter which religion you are. What matters is what you bring to the table with regards to ethics, morality, understanding, solidarity, and respect for humanity. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala khayri khalqihi Muhammadin wa alihi tayyibin at-tahirin al-ma'sumin.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure you'll all agree that we've heard lots of different things, lots of things that will make us all think. A bit like Khadija said at the beginning of her spoken word piece, this is about all of us as individuals. So although we're here as groups or part of societies or society as a whole, we're also here as individuals as well, not just us, but all of us here. And I hope that all of you were listening for yourself and have been reflecting and learning, and I certainly have been thinking about all sorts of things racing through my mind. I mentioned earlier on, I was talking to my friend here on the left and saying that I went to see the film Spotlight today. And I don't know if anyone has actually had a chance to see it yet. Has anybody seen the film Spotlight here? Okay, that's very good. You have. So you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a very... it won the best film at the Oscars, which, you know, may for some of you say a lot about the type of film, but it's a very heavy... I mean, I feel a bit freaked out by it, if I'm honest. Very difficult. I cried a lot through the film and afterwards speaking to my friend about it as well. It's a very difficult film. But it's a very much needed film in that it explores areas, although it specifically focuses on the Catholic Church in that particular film, but it touches on all sorts of things that actually affect really all of us, I think, in this room in one way or another. So I'd certainly, I'm not on commission or anything, I would certainly recommend that you go and see it, but I would recommend that you go and see it with a friend, that you can then sort of talk about it. It's a very difficult film, but it brings up all sorts of issues around abuse and power and all of the things that maybe we don't always want to associate with religion, perhaps. But as that film very, very does in a very good way, but in a very difficult way, is brings out a lot of those issues. So I think what we'll do, given that we've got about half an hour left, is we'll go straight to all of you, really. I'll just run through maybe a quick sort of summary, which won't do justice to all of our speakers, of course, but I was writing a few notes of my own, so maybe I'll just go through those, if I can make sense of where I've written them. So we heard first from Simon, who spoke about, in a very interesting way, I think, about weakness and foolishness, which may be not something that we were perhaps expecting him to say, or maybe some of you were expecting him to say that. I certainly found it was a very interesting way. He spoke about the decline of the church that lots of people often speak about, and that's always a very interesting thing when we hear about that in the news, especially now when people often compare it straight away with the rise maybe of other religions, particularly Islam, and what that means and how that's going to affect us as a country going forward. And he spoke about how there's very much a message of, and he gave us quotes directly from the Bible about being mocked and ridiculed, and how that has an impact on the power of God in all of that. So that was a very interesting start that we had from our Harry Potter graduate. Feel free to... we then heard from Leah, who very interestingly, I think, started off talking about what is the definition of a young person, and spoke about some of her work with that, spoke about the fact there are about 300,000 Jews in Britain, which maybe some people think the number would be higher, so it's always interesting for people to hear that. Spoke about the spectrum and the interpretations, which of course is the case in all of our religions, that there isn't one way. And even on this panel, you could potentially have a panel of all Jews, and actually you would all have different ways of looking, and certainly Muslims and Christians from different backgrounds. You could actually have a very interesting conversation with all of that. I think we all have that spectrum. Spoke about how for some it's religion is scary for some, and how do people approach that. and talked about the absolute importance of story and narrative. And I certainly feel as a Muslim, it's very important for us as Muslims to realise the importance of story and narrative, and that we actually need to own our own story. And we're frankly already probably sick and tired of everybody talking about, particularly as a Muslim woman, everybody speaking about who I am and what I believe and what I should wear and what I shouldn't wear. And you know, frankly, it's about us actually owning that narrative and speaking about that much more from our own perspective. Our Sheikh Zain here, he spoke about and started off very eloquently reciting from the Holy Quran, and spoke and gave a translation of that and what that means in that verse. Spoke about all sorts of things around the human mind and how that's evolved and developed, maybe not always in a good way. About technology. He spoke about arrogance and how, you know, often people feel that they don't need religion, the role of science, and how that's limited, and how we need to look at things in a broader way. We then went on to Damien, who spoke very much about solidarity and the importance of that. He very nicely spoke and reminded us all how much tax we all pay, which isn't always something that I like to actually think about, but he put it in a very nice way, so I thank you for that. And spoke about how we all pay taxes actually to help people that we don't even know in society, and maybe if we knew them and perhaps we wouldn't necessarily like them, but we pay anyway because we kind of have to. So that was a very nice way to talk about that. I've lost my other piece of paper with the other things. I think it's, no, that's, oh yes, good, well done. Spoke about how only about 15% of the population, perhaps when it comes to the census, etc., say that they don't necessarily believe in God. So that leaves the rest of us trying to figure out what this thing called God is. Spoke about social cohesion and how we're all worried about that and what that means for people of religion, but for others as well. And then last but not least, we spoke about, Sheikh Zakaria spoke about society and religion, what society and what religion. And if you were to rely on the likes of Nick Griffin and others like him, they would certainly say that Islam, for example, or Muslims have no place in this society at the moment, and that's not an insignificant thing. He then went on to talk about how Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Medina model, and how that was very inclusive, and how he and others, peace be upon them all, how they approached people from different backgrounds, and how we should be relating to that, and talked about how we are the best of humanity, but the best of humanity are those who benefit humanity the most when it comes to ethics and morals and respect for others. So hopefully that's a whistle-stop tour reminder that you've all got your really brilliant, outstanding questions ready. We've got a few. So are you going to read the questions out, or are we going to get people to? So people have written their questions down, I think.
I thought it might be easy just to start with 3 of them. There's a lot, so we're not going to get through them all.
Okay, so we're not going to get them all. So Jim, over to you.
So first, as Dr. Damien Howard said, from the media and other individuals are blaming Muslims for things that Muslims should not be blamed for. Apart from organising interfaith events, what can we do to tackle Islamophobia and also phobia of other religions? I can read them all out, all 3.
Yeah, okay, so have you all got paper to write down? Yes? Do you want some paper?
We
Are
were
you okay?
answering that question.
Yeah?
And then the second question was, is the fear of strengthening growing Islamophobic and xenophobic discourses undermining us from challenging theocracy and showing solidarity with victims of religious violence and repression? And then a third question, what answers does religion have for those in our society who are obsessed with tangible proof of the existence of God or Allah? Okay,
who wants to go first? You want to go first?
Well, you're looking at me as though I probably ought to. I get a bit stuck when we talk about Islamophobia, and then Christians start saying, "Well, there's Christophobia as well," and we can all sort of go down our burrows, and everybody hates us, and we start playing the victim. I'm not saying that nobody hates us, and I'm not saying we're never the victim, but to respond in that way is usually quite poor, and will lead to a bad response. And I don't think it's what God is calling us to do. What's the best way of tackling when people don't like us? Why not ask why they don't like us? Because it's not always because the media are bad. It's not always because the media are bad. I mean, some of us aren't very nice. That's one of the things that we have to face. Sometimes, you were talking about the Spotlight movie. I'm a Catholic, so I can talk about this. It's a pretty scary situation the Catholic Church got itself into in the city of Boston, which is a Catholic-dominated city, hushing up child abuse on quite a big scale. I mean, if people don't like Catholics as a result of that, well, it's not. I can't just say it's sort of Cathophobia. I don't think the word exists. I mean, there's a reason there, and we need to look it straight in the face and ask why. I think there's another reason, though, which is a bit easier to cope with for us, why people don't always like us. It's because they often don't know us. And this society we live in, I live in the East End of London, and frankly, the communities that live there live side by side, and they walk, they sit on the tube opposite each other in total silence, and they go off to their little silos, and they never engage with each other. Is it surprising that we breed all sorts of mistrust and suspicion about each other? Is that surprising?
No, it's not.
I don't think it is, because an awful lot of people just haven't met a Muslim, and an awful lot of Muslims just haven't met a Christian or a secular person and engaged in proper conversation. So I think those are two thoughts, and it's not going to solve the problem overnight, because I think it's a big problem. But those are just two thoughts, and I'll stop there.
Okay, anybody else like to tackle any of those questions? No? Should we carry on? We might go back to them, maybe. Just do one question.
Sorry,
you go?
I would.
Okay, go.
With regards to Islamophobia and tackling Islamophobia, well, I think we as human beings, we need to jettison our prejudices, and we need to stop allowing others to dictate the narrative for us. I'm aware that there are some Muslims who believe that Islam tells them, I don't know whether it's divine revelation they receive whilst they're sleeping, or whilst they're praying, or whatever else, but it tells them they must dominate everybody. That's not the message which I understand from the Quran. I want to dominate, but I want to dominate with love. So I think the responsibility upon myself as a Muslim in combating Islamophobia is to represent Islam as if the Prophet himself was standing by me and saying, go on now, Zachariah, you represent this message. What does the Prophet stand for? Well, he definitely doesn't stand for hatred, bloodshed, and discrimination. But we have to admit, as Muslims, that we have allowed a certain group of unsavory individuals to dictate the narrative. We have to take the narrative back, and we have to show the true face of Islam. So we have a responsibility. Non-Muslims also have a responsibility, and that is to ask themselves questions of, well, is that really what Islam says? Is that really what all Muslims are like? Let me go and find out. And we can only challenge and tackle the narrative of Islamophobia together, Muslims and non-Muslims.
Yeah, I could just add 2 or 3 sentences. I think, just echoing similarly what you both have said very briefly, I think that for Islamophobia, for non-Muslims, such as me and many other people, I think, you have to be vigilant and call it out when you see it in your community. When you see Islamophobia in your community, I think we need to be very, very vigilant and very quick on that. I also think that, when it comes to xenophobia that one feels about one's own community, the British Jewish community got asked this, unfortunately, a lot a year ago after the few Jewish people were killed in the kosher supermarket in Paris, and the media came to many of us and said, what are you thinking? Does everyone hate you? Are you afraid? And we had, the senior rabbi of the liberal movement, Rabbi Danny Rich, who's a lovely guy, just came up with a line that was very sincere, but that he just kept saying over and over because we got asked so much. I think we can all relate to this because I think many of our communities get asked this. Are you afraid? People hate you. Are you afraid? And he said, similar to what Damien just said, where open doors is opening minds. So all we can do is be an open place for people to come and to greet us and to ask us. And yes, and then also within the Jewish community as well, we have our unsavory and our extremist characters, and to call them out and to say this is not the true face of Judaism, the same thing.
Okay, should we go on to another question?
Yeah. So, just one at a time?
I think so, yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Do you see contemporary society as essentially good, bad, neutral? And if there's a problem, what's the solution?
How many minutes?
Dave?
See what if I could just come in there. A secular society has certain fixes which sometimes work and sometimes are. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work. One of the central themes certainly in Islam in particular and in the Abrahamic faiths generally, and I can even say the same for perhaps even the Sikh religion in this respect, is the idea of personal development. And state and secular society is not interested in the personal development of the individual. So you could be a pervert in your own home as long as you don't disturb your neighbour. And when I mean neighbour, I don't mean next door neighbour, I mean neighbour as in someone who is within your reach. The point is, as long as you don't disturb someone, you're fine. But that state of affairs is not right. What religion says is that you shouldn't be that in the first place. So rather than dealing with the criminal once the crime is done, the state doesn't deal with the birth of the problem, or if the problem has emerged, to detect it and to have an apparatus to deal with it. The state doesn't have the resources, the know-how, the manpower, or otherwise. And religion has a central role in this respect to play, to say that, listen, you could be what you are in your own home and your neighbour may not know and you may not be arrested. But you will be accountable and change yourself. Why? Because you've got, as a human being, certain roles, certain objectives, and if you allow yourself to disintegrate, you won't be able to achieve those objectives.
Okay, anybody else?
Yes, I mean, with regards to what can be done with regards to the evils and the badness and whatever else, that's very subjective. There is a tradition within secular society of secular ethical theories for hundreds of years, even thousands. We go back to virtue ethics developed by the Athenian masters. We look at deontology from Immanuel Kant. We look at utilitarianism, etc. It's to say that secular society is devoid of ethics and morality would be wrong. Okay? Because we've got this long tradition. Have they developed an adequate answer to the problems of society based upon, let's say, a rule-based ethical theory? Well, that's up for discussion. We have to see what individual systems produce for the betterment of all within society. I follow Islam, so I would argue that the divine command theory, as it's seen within Islam, is the answer. But I am not averse to having that divine command theory put under the microscope. And so what we have to do is we have to ask, what gives betterment for human beings within any given society with regards to these either secular religions or sacred religious traditions?
Anyone else?
Yeah, so to have a stab at the answer, so contemporary society, good or bad? I think I'd probably go with Dickens' quote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." And we've heard some of that today, haven't we? It's the best of times in terms of, I hadn't thought about that, but actually taxes. Man, that's a good thing, isn't it? I mean, paying for other people's healthcare, even if you didn't like them. Good line. It was a good best of times, and yet also we've heard some of the worst of times. dealing with, I'm sure some of you in this room are probably dealing with Islamophobia. I'm sorry about that, it's a terrible thing. Best of times and worst of times. And actually, I think the Bible would say it's always going to be a bit like that. It's always going to be a bit of a mix, and that's because there's sin in all of us. I guess lots of religions would agree on that. But it will always be a mix. And so on this earth, and so actually the solution is, actually I was saying earlier, Jesus Christ crucified to wash away sin. And he will return to bring in a world where there is no more tears, no more pain, no more wars. So I would say a Christian belief is that the problem is us, me, and the solution is Jesus.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody, any others? Have we got other questions?
I'm going all night with these questions. So once to give the audience, I'm more than happy for that to happen. But there was one more. It was, how can religion make people feel secure in a secular society?
Okay, so how can religion make people feel secure in a secular society? I think you touched on that.
Well, I was the one who said
yeah,
it, so
yeah.
I don't think I said. I probably did say religion. I think I mean God. I don't. You know, it's God is the important thing here. Religions are ways to God, or they're not. I mean, that's you know, sometimes they can get in the way. God could make us feel safe because His love is greater than the things that we put in the way. It's that simple. I don't think there's any great mystery to that. Religions are there to mediate God's love. I think that's fairly clear to me. But
Okay, anybody else want to answer that? No? Okay, so I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and ask a question. And I'd actually like to ask it to all of you, so no copping out of this one. And it involves really this question about gender. And I'm not talking now about necessarily the theory from the different faith traditions here about what God or what your faith perhaps talks about when it comes to gender interaction or equality. But I'm really talking about what we see on the ground, so whether that be Judaism and the issue around female rabbis or not, whether that be the issues from an Islamic perspective and some of the issues that I think are there that we need to deal with before everybody else decides that they're going to deal with it on our behalf. So I'd just like to hear people's reflections on that, really. What comes to mind when I talk about gender? So do you want to start from this end?
I'd love to. So gender, the Bible would say men and women are created in God's image. I think a number of people have commented on that. And so actually a Christian believes that men and women are both equal in value of dignity. So actually the Bible would say sexism would be a sin, a bad thing, a sexist joke. Putting someone down because they're a man or because they're a woman is a bad thing. So gender say equal in dignity. But also would, I think the Bible would celebrate the differences between men and women. So that, there are differences. They should be celebrated.
So do you think that's playing out in the way that it should in the churches and in the different Christian spaces? Is that playing out in the way that the Bible says it should, or are there?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's a mix. You know, something's good, something's bad. I'm sure I've probably got blind spots on it and things I could be better and more loving at. I can talk about the church I go to because it's the one I know, and I see as a man I feel very valued and cared for by the women, and I think my wife, if she was here, would say she feels loved and supported and protected by the men in the church. So I think, I think that's functioning healthily, I'd say.
Okay, very positive. Leah, what comes to mind when you think about gender?
When you ask this question, it's an incredibly live question in the Jewish community. I think in all religious traditions, when you inherit beautiful things from a past and are trying to make them meet the world today, and you inherit patriarchy with them, there always are going to be problems, is the way that I kind of see it. And so it's a very big question in the Jewish community. The Jewish community at that spectrum I talked about before, one of the main differences, other than interpretation of Torah and Talmud, that differentiates that on the ground is that, and the way that I would put this, and among my camp, the language we would use is egalitarian, non-egalitarian, which is already politicized language, but this is language that comes from, at least it's a sincere place of integrity. People that use it, they mean the critique, but I think they really believe in those values. So that is to say that of the 3 or 4 mainstream movements in Judaism in Britain today, which is very similar to a certain extent throughout the world, to different degrees, there is a kind of traditional half where women are treated very differently and have different legal and religious roles and can't be leaders as well, religious leaders. And then there's a more kind of progressive half where it is much more and more common, the way that it is with lawyers and doctors and people in civil society, where women are considered complete and full members of all various parts of the religious body and the legal body of the Jewish community. And that is a big point of tension in modern Judaism, intra-Jewishly, right? So I hear it from all sides. This is a real thing that divides the traditional and the progressive wings of Judaism, and will continue to. So there's a lot of movement on that. Even the Orthodox world, what we call the Orthodox world in Judaism, which is the more traditional end, is now having an intra-Orthodox Jewish conversation about this, such that there's a left wing, I suppose if you'd call it. I don't like left and right in this sense. It's not political in that way, but an open Orthodox side that is now starting to give smicha, rabbinic ordination to women, and a more traditional side of Orthodoxy that thinks that is incredibly dangerous. And that is happening at this moment in the last 10 or 15 years. And that's going to be very interesting. But from the outside of that, as a progressive, that conversation, we feel it's like, well, we've already done that, as it were, but they're doing it in a different way, in a more Jewishly legalistic way that will persuade more traditional-minded Jews that this is actually appropriate within the laws of the halakha, which is Jewish legal or Jewish law. So yeah, it's a really live consideration. So of the 4 main movements in Judaism in Britain, the 4 mainstream ones, 2.5 of them have women leadership at the top of it, and at the very, very top, and some are now senior rabbis of the movements and senior rabbis of congregations, and one of them, plus the ultra-Orthodox, who kind of don't interact actually with the mainstream Jewish community that much, don't have that. So it's a very interesting and political and religious question in the Jewish community, ongoingly all the time. And there are spaces that I go into as a female rabbi, for example, where I surprise many Jews because they didn't know that I existed. So I get it both from non-Jews and Jews, because Jews don't know I exist, and the non-Jews certainly also don't know that female rabbis exist. So it's a bit of an interesting world, but an exciting world.
Yep. I mean, I think there's definitely something about faith and gender that University of Westminster, not wanting to put ideas in your head, that could certainly do as a very interesting. I mean, I've certainly learned a lot from my Jewish friends, female friends, about this, a lot of the similarities in terms of the struggles.
Me too.
From a Muslim and Jewish perspective, there's a lot more similarities in that issue than I certainly had realised, and it's been very eye-opening, but also very empowering for me actually to hear some of those and to make some of those friendships. Anybody, would you like to?
Yeah, I think when one looks at gender from not an Islamic perspective, but from a Muslim perspective, a different picture emerges. The problem with the modern Muslim world, and again I emphasize Muslim world, not with Islam, is that there seems to be a blur between culture and religion. And a lot of people who practice religion, or who have certainly practiced religion in the East, who come from a tradition where they close their eyes in practice, whereas in the West, of course, the tradition is more emphasized towards opening your eyes and then practicing. Of course, those who come from a tradition where you close your eyes in practice, within that practice, culture has been so intertwined that sometimes they can't distinguish between what is culture and what is religion. To just cite a few examples, arranged marriages, for example. Some of the methodology of arranged marriages are actually obnoxious to Islam. Likewise, the role of women in society in the subcontinent, she's almost chained to the kitchen sink, and that's what her role is. But of course that's not Islam, that's more culture. Then if you carry on, you come to a country called Saudi Arabia, where women are not allowed to drive. That's not got anything to do with Islam. That's got to do with the cultural perspectives, or should I say prejudices, that men have. And because historically men have been in power, and those cultures have served that power base, they find themselves very insecure in relinquishing those seats of power to women. That's why you don't find women clerics in Saudi Arabia. You don't find... In fact, I would say this, and I say this categorically, one of the most racist states in the world is actually Saudi Arabia. And only because it's intertwined its culture into Islam and has become a so-called example of what Islam is, but quite the contrary. It discriminates against its own people, it discriminates against other religion, and the list goes on and on and on. But the point I'm making within the context of gender is that because there is this confusion, and that confusion is associated to the intertwined nature of practice between culture and religion, but if you look at Islam in its real form, you will see that actually femininity is there to be celebrated and masculinity is there to be celebrated. Each has its role and each has its function.
Okay, just a minute each.
I used to be a really card-carrying liberal. I was brought up exclusively by feminists, men-hating feminists at that. So it was just a no-brainer for me as a teenager and in my early 20s to hope that one day women would be ordained priests and all the rest of it. I've just learned to mistrust the liberal narrative a little bit. And the liberal narrative says this: until 1962, everything was barbaric and men ruled over women and it was all total oppression. And then from about the 1960s onwards, good people started being born and they respect each other and have the kind of obviously egalitarian way of relating to each other that we all have and find so obvious and easy. And isn't it terrible that religion was part of the pre-1962 thing? I've just learned to see that things were always much more complicated than that. And I look back at 2,000 years of Christian history in which an awful lot of the really provocative leadership was by women. And I'm not saying this to say Catholicism has got it all sorted out, because that's just manifestly not the case. There's an awful lot of sexism in my church. But still, in spite of that structure, there's a way in which women have constantly, right back to the start, we hold up Mary above any other human being as somebody of extraordinary holiness. Mary Magdalene, the first apostle to the apostles, and all sorts of holy women through the ages who've exercised extraordinary leadership. I've just got this slight feeling that liberal politics isn't going to solve the problem any more than anybody else has done. Actually we've had it for quite a long time now, and still women get paid less than men, and still they're subject to all the same sorts of things they've always been subject to. So I'm sorry, I'm sounding like a terrible pessimist now. I don't think legislation is going to sort it out. I think it's part of the deep brokenness of the human condition. I think these deep structures of injustice and inequality are very, very deep in us, and I think only God will deal with it. Sorry, that's terribly bleak, isn't it?
No, that's good.
But I think it's
Okay.
part of the truth.
Just a brief.
Well, when I think of gender, I naturally go to my mother, an unschooled theologian, a poet, somebody who was rooted in a tradition of love of deity. And then I look to what the impact of that closeness, we call it qurba in Arabic, closeness to Allah Azza wa Jal, had on my sisters. And that was an empowering force in their lives, which drove them on to success, both in the business world, in academia, and also in their private lives. And then also I look at my wife and I look at my daughter, and what do I see in them? I see in them the potentiality for greatness, not because they are women, but because they are human beings. They just happen to be women. But if we are going to use their femaleness as the prism via which we see them, then in the tradition which I follow within Islam, the femaleness, the femininity, is something which has been endowed by deity, given by Allah, and as such, it has to be respected. It has to be embraced. Solidarity needs to be sought with it. Amina Wadud comes to mind. Asma Barlas comes to mind. Dr. Rebecca Masterton, Dr. Amina Inlows, they all come to mind when I hear this discourse on a gender within Islam. And I see the reality with regards to how Islam values the femininity which women carry. It is not secondary to masculinity. It is on par. And in many instances, it excels.
Okay, I think we're out of time. So, as with any good event, I'm sure all of you, I certainly am, left feeling that we could probably go on for another hour or two. But that's the nature of these kind of events, left with all sorts of thoughts. And, you know, we certainly, I know Jim and his team here certainly didn't set this out to be a event where we found out all of the answers to all of the problems, but certainly for something to just reflect on. A very good, I think, panel of different perspectives, lots of similarities, but also lots of things that are different as well, which I think was a brilliant thing. And just to finish really by three things that three people here have said in various different ways. When Damien spoke about how when people don't like us and talk about us in a bad way, us being the large groups of us, then we need to maybe think about why that is and not automatically be defensive, but think about what is it that they're seeing about us. And often it can be mistrust and suspicion purely because we don't know each other well enough. And I started off by talking about the importance of friendship and finish with that as well. Zachariah spoke about dominating with love, and Leah spoke about keeping open doors and open minds. So I think with that in mind and with that to finish, I would like all of us to thank all of our amazing panellists again, and also Khadija, although she had to leave, to thank her for starting off in a very brave way, I think, in a very positive way, but something that's not easy to do, so well done to her. And well done to Jim and his amazing student union team and others who've put this event together, advertised it, and for all of you as well for making time to come, to be open-minded and with an open heart. I hope we leave feeling that we've learned and benefited from each other's company. So thank you very much for being a good audience, and again, we'll see you next time.